You are now listening to Comp Corner, brought to you by the law offices of Bradford and Barthel.
Welcome, and thank you for joining us on Comp Corner. I'm your host, Nasir F. Adil. We have the distinct pleasure of having our first applicant's attorney, Patrick Gorman, on this episode. Patrick stops by and we discuss interesting topics, including why applicants seek representation after their work injury, what defendants may misjudge when defending a claim, differences at the various WCABs throughout California, misconceptions about representing injured workers, and we talk about emerging trends in workers' compensation today. Later, Patrick gives predictions about how our wonderful workers' compensation industry may evolve over the next few decades, and of course, we also get to pick Patrick's brain in America's favorite segment, 5 in 5. Patrick shares what movie he can quote word for word, his go-to excuse when he's running late, and what piece of life-changing advice he initially thought was useless, but turned out to be priceless. Please email your Comp Corner questions to compcorner@bradfordbarthel.com. Our email is in the show notes. In our email segment, we tackle a question submitted by friend of the show and claims examiner, Jesus. Jesus asks about modified work offers, and I give some practice tips on how to send modified work offers and limit temporary disability exposure. And on to our guest, Mr. Patrick Gorman. All right, a warm Comp Corner welcome to our guest, Mr. Patrick Gorman. Patrick is a friend, and he's also a solo practitioner that represents injured workers in far Northern California with cases in the Bay Area, Central Valley, and Central Coast. How are you, Patrick?
Amazing. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming on. We are excited to have you on as our first applicant's attorney on the podcast. Patrick, what's the hardest part of being an applicant's attorney, in your opinion?
I mean, there's two parts to this, right? There's emotional, and then there's time management. And I think they bleed into one another. I think clients, injured workers, said there's no distinction between workers' comp issues and other issues, right? So they just want to make sure I didn't forget about them. They want to just call and talk about their case, and I don't have time to do that because I need to do legal work. Right. I wish I did have time to just talk to them about their case. It's easier than the legal work. But, I have to do legal work. I need to be working cases up, talking to the other side, going to court, going to depositions, and explaining that to them is difficult. But that time management side it's very frustrating because, sometimes the information that you hear from them in these conversations is very important. And other times it's literally just for reassurance. And it's like explaining to them that, hey, we are here for legal services. And here's the scope of our representation. And explaining that to somebody going through a hard time without sounding like you're telling them to go away, it's very challenging professionally, time management wise. Emotionally, it's not an intentional thing by an insurance carrier, an adjuster, or a defense attorney. They're doing what they're supposed to be doing to make sure that they're not paying out benefits they should be paying out. But these folks, they go through the hardest times of their lives, and some lose everything. As long as they're talking, they're not gonna end their life. The ones that don't talk worry me, but it gets really, really dark for a lot of folks. And so emotionally, it's emotionally draining because I can't fix a lot of these things. A lot of these things have they're collateral, right? They're casualties to the claim itself, but they're things that are going on in their life that I can't do anything about, and I can't fix everything for everybody. So emotionally, I worry. I worry about some of these folks, and I see them suffering, and I can only move so fast, and things can only get done so fast. And so emotionally, it's. I know that we're going to get to the end. They don't, and so it's, it could be draining. Right? Hey, it's like I'm telling them to stay in the marathon, right? And they're out of gas. You're just like, keep running. We're going to get to the finish line, right? It's hard emotionally sometimes.
Sure. I can imagine that. That must bring in the counseling element of being a counselor, huh? You got to actually, listen. you're a therapist. You're also the oddly enough, we do play the therapist role as far as listening to our clients, making sure that we listen, then we relay advice. So I can imagine that being a different perspective. So thank you for
Yeah.
answering that, Patrick.
Yeah, sometimes they kind of, depending on their personality, sometimes they feel like being extremely aggressive and even
Mm,
threatening is going to get things done. Otherwise, it's not going to move anything faster. They don't know that, and I just we have to insulate the office from that kind of stuff. So sometimes telling somebody goodbye is really really difficult because you know that
mm.
they're hanging on by a thread, but you can't have that.
Of course. No, that's understandable. Now, conversely, we threw the fastball at you with the first question. Patrick, what's the easiest part of being an applicant attorney?
I work more hours than I did as a defense attorney, and it feels like I work less. I'm never looking to the clock at the end of the day because I think just that that purpose, that sense of purpose in each individual's lives. I mean, I've touched the
Mm,
lives of thousands of people, it's a privilege to be in the spot to be able to do so much good. It keeps your sails full. So the easiest part is I don't need to dig deep for the energy to do my job. It just happens. It pulls me along or pushes me forward. So that I think just yeah, that sense of purpose, that sense of duty and everything, it just keeps you going. So the easiest part is going to work in the morning, really.
yeah. That's a great answer. I think a story that I tell when my dog, my oldest she was like 3 or 4 at the time, and she asked me, she's like, "Daddy, what do you do for a living?" And I said, "Oh boy, this will be interesting to explain workers' comp defense to a
And she's
toddler."
not a
But I
lawyer,
was
so you can't, right? It's like,
yeah. So I was like, "Oh, daddy helps people." And she was like, "Wow, my daddy's a hero. He helps people." And then fast forward, she was like 9 or 10 and she hears me dictating a letter and she hears me kind of giving recommendations to my client who are, insurance companies or TPAs. And she's like, "Wait, dad, you're not necessarily helping people, dad." And I say, "Well, it's a little bit gray area as far as helping people, but we help people differently, right? I help insurance companies or TPAs. You actually help injured workers. So there's an element that I can understand and respect where you're coming from as far as, you
you know,
probably working more now, but feeling like you're making a kind of a different difference, more of a difference or impact. Does that sound
let me,
accurate?
yeah, I want to add something to that you may not have seen. I didn't see it until I'm on this end. Insurance companies need an attorney to give them legal recommendations before they could do something. They can't do it on their own
Sure.
without risking being sued for making a decision that costs their client more money. And they need legal
Hmm.
advice in order to act on it. So no, there are benefits that would never be delivered if there was not a legal recommendation to provide those benefits. I really appreciate working with good attorneys. We
Mm.
go through it, we figure out what we need in order
Yeah.
to get to where we need to get. And then there's legal recommendations that are sound and the benefits are then delivered. They would not be delivered if it were not for an attorney making that recommendation. So no, you absolutely do help people. You remove the barrier.
No, I appreciate that. Thank you, Patrick. Now, Patrick, what do you enjoy the most as far as your current position representing injured workers?
The ability
Mhm.
to operate on my view of the world, right? Instead of just
Sure.
more of the shareholder responsibility view of the world, right? The
Right,
corporate view of the
right.
world, and things. And I get to resolve problems in a creative I mean, I really get to solve a lot of problems that would not be solved as a solo practitioner and representing injured workers. I can't imagine big firms policy, right?
Sure.
You get to be creative as a defense attorney, but only as creative
Uh-huh.
as your opposing counsel too, right? So yeah,
Sure.
I guess that's it. I guess the being nimble, freedom,
Mhm.
right? I get to pick
Sure.
my clients more.
You gave something a great answer, and I think it kind of helps me think back to the podcast episode we had, number 3, with JP Torres, as well as the podcast episode number 4 we had with Scott Roundtree. Now, JP, he had an applicant attorney background like yourself, and Scott Roundtree had a claims background, and now he's running things at ICW as far as litigation manager. But as far as your perspective, and I think that applicant attorneys who become defense attorneys and vice versa, defense attorneys who become applicant attorneys, they have a opinion on the overall claim that really is second to none because they can see different perspectives. So as far as you being able to lawyer differently and do things that you enjoy, does that different perspective as far as having represented both sides kind of play a role in how you currently advocate?
Absolutely. 100%. And it even I think it serves my clients well.
Mm,
You know, the worst thing an applicant's attorney can do is unintentionally paint a carrier or a defense firm into a corner where now
mm,
they have to fight
interesting.
over a fight that doesn't even matter. I
Right.
mean, it's like if I'm trying to make an issue out of saying that there's a penalty situation or something like that, when there doesn't, it's ambiguous, right? And I'm pushing on that. That's not helping
Yeah.
my client. And sometimes, if there's excess coverage and you're hitting that threshold and it puts into, you know, excess is looking as to what we don't have to pay. You're putting third party administrators into bad spots. You're starting
Yeah.
fights where you can't see the forest through the trees. You don't know where this road is
Yeah.
heading,
Yeah.
and you're short-sighted, and it doesn't even serve your client. Now you're tied up at trial. You jam your case up for a year and a half on recon and stuff like that. And if the
Sure.
fight was over, 2 years of retro or 2 months of retro TD, right? Or whether or not Alvarez Guzman applies, and it's just unnecessary. That there's usually, if you have the evidence and the information, usually the carrier. I mean, you might have to get them to the edge of the cliff, but usually the carrier is going to do what they need to
Mhm.
do, right? They're what they're
Right.
supposed to do.
Right.
They just don't have what they need. And there's not a good working relationship where they trust the injured worker's attorney to not exploit information against them too, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, no, I think that's avoiding those unnecessary pitfalls. I mean, I think that a lot of bad case law has been made, uh, by both sides where
Yeah.
people got
Yeah.
painted into a corner. It had nothing to do with the actual issue.
No, I really appreciate that response. I think you said you hit the nail on the head as far as you got to pick and choose your battles on both sides. If you're just literally picking a battle for the sake of being, for being aggressive, and defense attorneys, we do that a lot, where you're like, hey, I'm going to make sure that I litigate this tiny issue. And of course, the clients at first are like, "Oh, great! I have a real, aggressive defense attorney on my end," which most clients like. But if you're going to keep a file open on an unnecessary issue for 6, 12 months, 18 months on a trivial issue, then who really are you benefiting, right? And who
Yeah.
knows, you may not even win. So seeing that perspective and getting big picture and moving the file along, closing a file is the best file. That's, I think, something that we all benefit from. Now, Patrick, what do you miss, if anything, as far as being a defense attorney? I know there's a lot to miss, but don't say them all at once. But what are a few
No,
things that you
no,
may
there
miss
is.
as far
There
as your
is.
days?
Yeah, I'm all alone, man. I don't have the
Mm,
camaraderie.
I
Um,
see.
I mean, God, the mentorship, my God. I mean,
Mm.
there are a lot of solo practitioners and small firms on the applicant side. There's not a lot of mentorship. I don't know. I would be lost in this world. You guys used to tease me when I was a new attorney, right? Sean Morsrow was like always giving me a hard time. Like, oh, Patrick's going to go start a fight, right? I mean, you need mentorship. You need mentorship to be a good attorney, period.
Very true.
And those
Very
mentor,
true.
and even a lot of your mentors, they don't even know they are. You're just watching them in court. But yeah, I think that I missed that. Um,
Sure.
there's slow months and busy months, right? So I don't have the stability of like, hey, this is my Friday, this is my next week, right?
Yeah.
Vacations are rough. I don't go on. I don't know. Some AAs go on a lot of vacations. I don't know how they do it. I can't. If I leave for 2 weeks, I don't get paid
Oh,
for a month and a half.
right.
So and my client's case is just freeze. Nobody does the work while I'm gone. So I miss the predictability of work life balance. And really the camaraderie. There was a lot of camaraderie that I do miss, obviously.
No, that's a great answer. I think a story that Sean Morrisroe, who's a mentor of mine, who we still talk about to this day, was back in Patrick and I worked at the Oakland Bradford Barthel office for a few years. I remember Patrick when he kind of was relatively new to the defense game. I remember it was like we had to wait like a one. You probably forgot this, but it was like a 1:30 hearing, and we used to walk to the board, be at the board in a couple minutes,
Yeah.
and it was like 1:20. And we're like, Patrick, where are you off to? He's like, oh, I'm gone to the board. We're like, all right, see you at, 3, 4, 5 o'clock. He's like, no, no, no. I'll be back at 2 o'clock. We're like, Patrick, your hearing's at 1:30. How are you going to be back in 25, 30 minutes? He's like, oh, no, I'm going to go to the board. I'm just going to get this case dismissed real quick. I'll be back. I'll be back before the ice is even melted. Sean and I are like, all right, this guy knows what he's doing. Let's see how that goes. So fast forward, it's like 6 o'clock.
Yep.
Poor Patrick
6:15.
comes back. 6:15, a good 5 hours later, Patrick comes back, understandably kind of disheveled, just goes through the ringer. And I think Patrick found out the hard part of why it's called
Yeah.
workers' comp sometimes in California, right?
I kept the judge stayed after 5. She was I think it was Rosa
Yeah.
Moran. I got run through the ringer that day. That was a rough one. Yeah, I remember you guys teased me about you guys. That was the running joke at the college meetings for a while there. Yeah. Yeah, I do miss, I mean, the in-person at the board,
Yeah.
things like that.
Yeah.
It develops a practitioner, and
Yeah.
I just I there's I don't know how things are gonna be. going forward. I think we'll have some of that, and
Yeah.
we're going to be missing some of that.
No, that's a theme we talk about on different episodes was exactly that. Look, most of us like being remote. We like having that flexibility, that kind of independence. But there's nothing that can just really replace the idea of, hey, let me go to the board and talk to like 12 attorneys. Let me go to the office and run my question by 7 attorneys. We have that, we have chat, we have different ways to meet by video. It's not like we're all on islands, but that in-person element. And I feel kind of, rough for the younger attorneys who just
Yeah.
passed the bar post COVID because they never experienced that, right? At least me and you got to experience years of knocking on doors and picking brains and all that other stuff. So I totally agree with you on that assessment. Now, Patrick, being in Northern California, I mean Northern as far as actual Northern, not Northern as far as the Bay Area, but what are some differences in the WCABs from Redding to the Bay Area, in your opinion?
So, there's 19 plus hearings on calendar in Oakland and San Francisco on a judge's morning and afternoon calendar. And, it's you got to be an well-known attorney to be able to bounce something off a judge. Even in the old days in person, right? A lot of stuff's just going to get a disposition. Um, you can't really test questions in front of a judge before pushing it to trial.
Sure.
And the worst thing about going to trial is having to kick back for further discovery, right? You think you're
Oh,
done.
yeah.
You think you're going to get resolution. And now you're right back where you started. That's frustrating. That's a loss of 6 months of your life. Um, yeah, I that would happen even before COVID, but not as much, right? But up in Reading, they don't have the impacted calendars. The judges are all former defense attorneys too, very good ones
Okay.
actually. I think you're going to get less of a situation where they're gonna work with you. They're gonna let you bifurcate issues. They're gonna let you narrow down issues. They're gonna expect you to
Huh.
narrow down issues. They will let you go to trial, but they'll also talk to you. They review settlements. They will ask you questions about a CNR before signing off on it. I think a
Yeah.
lot of folks out of the area that are submitting CNRs in settlements, electronically, are getting a lot of orders suspending because the judges have questions and they're looking at them.
Yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
there's too many impacted calendars and other boards. So there's that difference. But also the bar up here, uh, it's a lot more candid. There's a lot more candor
Okay.
among the
Okay.
attorneys. It's a small bar. I think the attorneys are really good practitioners, and it's not as hostile. You don't see people go get loud with one another in the break room. We've seen that, both of us. Over in the courtroom, there's not a lot of animosity. So there's yeah, I think that that's the big difference. And you can't really hide behind the numbers like in other boards. Like as attorneys can they don't have to be the best behaved, right? They don't their professional
Sure.
reputation doesn't get as impacted as much as in a smaller venue where everybody knows everybody's business, right? So
Oh, yeah.
those
Yeah.
are the big differences. As far as the WCAB, the medical treatment situation up here is really really drastic. It's a crisis. So they deal with
Yeah.
that a lot. But yeah, I think the judges up here are fair. I think they're very fair. I'm not saying they're not fair in other places. I feel like they have the ability to really take their time. Other
Okay.
judges, not so much. There's so much more volume at these other boards. I think a lot of judges
Yeah.
are, they're forced to issue their decisions without being able to take as much time as they may want to.
Yeah. No, you gave an accurate response. I mean, there's upwards of 25 workers' compensation appeals boards throughout the state. You have some in LA, Marina Del Rey, those areas that have, multiple, like dozen or more judges at one board. But you have other boards that are, far less frequented, like Reading, other ones that are more remote. So it's just human nature, right? Some judges are just going to have way more on their calendar than other boards. So that was a very practical response. Thank you for that. Now, Patrick, as a applicant attorney, in your opinion, what are the reasons why some of the more common reasons why injured workers become represented? Why do they go from being pro per to then seeking actual representation?
The number one thing that puts people in my office is a denial of physical therapy or MRIs.
Oh, interesting.
That's the
Okay.
number one and two things that put people in an applicant's attorney's office. They deny physical therapy or an MRI.
Hmm. Interesting.
Um, as a defense attorney, I've had a couple of self-insured employers where we didn't have a lot of litigated cases. And in one case, there was a claim. It was the guy wasn't injured at work. He had a child who had a brain disease. He had to drive him down to UC to get him brain treatment, and hurt himself at home and lied. Right. No DA is going to
Sure.
prosecute the guy. He didn't get any benefits. But in the process of that case, they deposed, the injured workers attorney deposed 5 coworkers. All of them had a prior
Mm.
work injury. All of them had the same story. I got injured. I peed in a cup. I went to the doctor. I had an MRI. I had a surgery, and I was back at work in 5 months.
Mm.
Right? None of them hired an attorney.
Yeah.
None of them needed an attorney. They're all working. So the number one thing
Right.
that creates the litigated claim is a denial of conservative care usually, and it's usually or an MRI,
Interesting.
imaging or conservative care. And a lot of these, UR is kind of on autopilot now, and stuff. So not kind of, it's on autopilot now. I don't know how many doctors they would have to hire to actually redo each and every one of these URs, right? I don't think
Sure.
there's enough on the planet. So naturally so. And so I think a lot of the conservative care gets rejected because of different things that are going on in
Mhm.
that world, the automation world. Yeah, but that's the number one thing that puts people in my office. And most of them, I tell people a lot of times they don't need an attorney.
Mm.
They need to talk to the
Yeah.
adjuster. But adjusters have really, really high files now, claims.
Sure.
So they don't have time to talk to a lot of injured workers too, right? So, I think there's systemic issues that are creating it. But yeah, that's the number one thing that causes a litigated claim.
That's an interesting response that denial of conservative care would push someone over that threshold, but sometimes it can be something so seemingly trivial that would, turn someone into decide to get represented. So interesting take. Now, Patrick, as far as representing injured workers, obviously on the defense side, we have some beliefs that may or may not be accurate, but we have general misconceptions, I should say, or thoughts on those who represent injured workers. But now that you're on the applicant side, what are some common misconceptions regarding representation of injured workers, in your opinion?
Well, I think that some of those conceptions they're not mutually exclusive, right?
Mm, mhm.
There's different. There is a spectrum of personalities and quality when it comes to any profession, including doctors and accountants and
Sure.
attorneys. So both can be true. There are some really, really good applicants attorneys that really, really
Hmm.
care about the profession as itself, right? The practice of law as a profession. They are stewards of the system.
Hmm.
Um, there are some, and then there are some
Right.
who run their practices more like a factory, right? They're trying to
Right.
automate and streamline and make every single claim the same, and none of them are, right? So
Sure.
and they're volume based, type folks. So I think that you know
Good old Mills, huh? Yeah.
I find that we could all be wrong. We could all make mistakes. We could all not hear somebody, and I think that a lot of times people don't listen because I was at the board. I was at the hearing a couple of months ago, and there was an attorney from a firm that that was applicant's practice where I see a lot of online advertising for him, and I instantly rushed to judgment. Just thought, oh, this might be kind of a volume based practice. This guy,
Sure.
there's a carrier that does automatic commutations. So if you have a stip, or there's an attorney fee award from that stip that's commuted, they automatically take a commutation reduction without an order from a
Mm.
judge, and then they take it
Mm.
from the injured worker's benefits. This injured worker was underpaid
Eesh.
by $178, and this attorney was at the board fighting for it,
Sheesh.
you know, because it was wrong.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
I think we just need to be open-minded with injured workers
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
defense attorneys. Sometimes
Right.
I see a defense attorney from a certain area. I'm like, oh, this person's going to do everything to do nothing, right? But
Gotcha.
they wind up being
Yeah.
amazing applicants attorneys. I've had cases where an attorney took a real hard position against my client. And this client was referred by an attorney that I know. So I didn't really vet her well. Um, and and I'm sitting there and I'm butting heads with the guy, and we're about to go to war. We're calling each other names, Stormy Gorman, right? And then I'm like,
Storm Gorman, yes.
and it's with a carrier that I really care about that carrier too, because I'm like, you're putting them in a position, right? You're putting them in a situation. Why are you doing this? So then I just said,
Mhm.
what's going on? And so we sat back, we stepped away from our egos, we started talking, and I'm like, yeah, but I have this, do you have the evidence, or did she just tell you about the evidence? I'm like, well, she told me.
Mm.
He's like, do you have the evidence? Do you have the evidence? Do you have the evidence? He kept saying that after the fifth time. I'm like, let's just step back. Let me try to unring this bell. Let me see what I can get as far as the evidence that this person's claiming that exists, and what they don't have.
Right.
And it wound up being this person had none of the stuff that they claimed they had. It wasn't,
Interesting.
and so I wound up having to step away from the claim, right? I can't represent a client that, so I wound up not representing her. But I think we just need to listen. I guess so the
Yeah.
misconception
Yeah.
is that the other side is unreasonable is the misconception. Um, and
Hmm.
we don't know that. We don't know that until we
Right.
actually listen to them and determine. And some of them are unreasonable. You know what I mean? But you can get through that
Right.
barrier too. By just saying, "Hey, let's talk here. What's really going on?" You know?
Yeah. No, I love that answer. I think once you start grouping any group of claims, people, whatever, as far as being the same, as a lawyer, that's when you've already failed. Number one, you cannot ever group anything as far as being a part of something that you don't know about. You have to do due diligence. You have to listen. You have to review the file. You have to review the claims notes. You have to review the medicals. That goes, I don't care if you represent injured workers or insurance companies. So I think listening and doing your due diligence, that's workers' comp 101. So I appreciate that response, Patrick.
Have you ever had the pleasure of reading one or more of the hundreds of newsletter articles found in the B&B blog? If not, you are missing out on a tremendous tool. Every week, our attorneys demonstrate their special insights into the defense of workers' compensation matters. Individual articles are available on our B&B blog page at bradfordbarthel.com, where you can also sign up to automatically receive new articles and upcoming webinar information.
Now, Patrick, I love your unique career journey. I think it's really one of a kind. Can you tell us about how you arrived at your current role as far as now representing applicants?
Yeah. So I don't know. We kind of joke that I'm like Goodwill Hunting, right? So I got in a lot
How
of
about them
trouble as a kid,
apples?
right? How about I got a number? Yeah, no, look,
Tell us
I
about
got
that, Patrick. I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
so
I'm kidding.
I got in a lot of trouble as a kid, and I wound up getting a GED in like a boys' ranch, and then joining the army, and it changed my world. I think a lot of people that have trouble in life, it's a confidence issue. They don't know what they're capable of, and the army definitely
Sure.
pulls that out of you, right? So I got out of the army,
Oh yeah.
and I had a buddy. So this is as automation's occurring, right? This is like 2000 into 2004. I got a job on the Pacific Options Trading Floor, just up Coast, and it was awesome. And it was like that's why trading places means something different to me, right? Because they're on the commodities floor. I wore the coat and everything. I wasn't a
Oh
trader
yeah.
though. I got hired grabbing the ticket from the guy at the desk and literally running it out to the guy in the trading crowd, writing down notes and
Wow.
bringing it back to the guy as a runner, right? I got a job doing that. And you had to take a fractions
Wow.
test because this is back before they didn't use decimals back then. They used fractions
Oh
on
yeah.
prices
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
options, right? And so yeah, as long as you could go down to sixteenths, sixteenths, and you could add and subtract a 16th to an eighth, you could get the job. So I got the job as a runner, and I just in the military, I was in the infantry and infantry scout and stuff, and it was like, there's nothing you can't do physically, right? Mentally, I didn't know, how smart I was or how dumb I was, right? I just assumed I was dumb, I
Sure.
think, and I just kind of took to it. It was very fascinating to me, so I started learning a lot, and I wound up becoming like a derivatives principal and a VP of options trading at a firm and stuff, and then everything went automated, and it was like, hey, you can move to New York or you can lose your job. So, I did miss the military. I wanted that environment. I decided I wanted to be a cop. So I went through the police academy
There
and I
we go.
graduated from the police academy in '06. And then, you know,
Another great '80s movie, by the way, Police Academy.
oh
But
yeah,
anyhow,
oh yeah.
anyway, go ahead.
They don't have
Sorry.
comedians that can make the noises with their mouth anymore, do they? They don't.
Mi-
You know,
Michael Winslow, the great Michael
they don't.
Winslow.
He's the last of his kind, right? So, um, yeah, so I went through the academy, and it was nothing like the military. I mean, I do not have the temperament to be a cop. At some point I'm going to blow it, right? I'll
Sure.
admit it. I everybody has a breaking point, and I can't let people spit on me and stuff. I just not that guy. So hats
Sure.
out to all the guys who can do that. They're different people. Like their mentality is not. They're amazing. I don't know how they could do it for 25 years. So anyway,
Oh
so
yeah.
I go through that and realize that's not for me, and I decided to go to law school. I was actually working
Mm.
at BMD as a driver at Bradford Barthel. I was a driver and a file clerk, and I'm like,
Yeah.
this is really fascinating to me. Um, really just I honor the profession. I mean, the profession of practicing law. I mean, it's um, I hold the profession up. It's just the highest regard. We're all part of a system here, and this system
Yeah.
changes lives for better or worse.
Oh yeah.
So anyway, I decided I wanted to go to law school, and I went through law school, and as a special status student with no college, I had to take the
Mm.
baby bar and everything, and I just it some when they talk about an aptitude, I just have an aptitude for it. I could be the
Yeah.
dumbest guy in the world with a million other things, but I just had an aptitude for it.
Yeah.
Everything's a puzzle. and it's just solving puzzles
Mm,
really. I suck at solving puzzles actually, but I'm really I just naturally can do.
yeah, yeah. Oh, that's just a unique, one of a kind career journey. I think it's unparalleled in so many ways. I mean, just to get you where you are. I mean, they've definitely built the man who you become. So I think that's super commendable on your end. Uh, Patrick, where do you think defendants can make the claims process better or smoother to avoid injured workers getting represented?
Like in a perfect world,
Yeah,
in
just a few
today's world,
things. Sure.
I think I think we're in for turbulent times for a while until things settle down with the combating automation between vendors and carriers, because vendors
Mm.
they're using automated programs to bill for things, and then carriers are using automated services to prevent that, to prevent unnecessary payments, right? So we have a lot of that,
Yeah,
and so
yeah, yeah.
if that didn't exist, we've all seen there's amazing claims adjusters out there. There's
Oh yeah,
amazing claims
yeah, yeah.
adjusters where they hand you the
The
file.
vast majority.
This kid got hit in the head with a helicopter blade and wound up being 18% after everything was said and done. They removed part of this kid's skull, had
Wow.
his brain expand and then shrink back down and then put it back on. And I just remember, sometimes these claims adjusters will tell you, like, I'm a better person for having, worked on this claim, right? So
Mm,
if we had more of that, then I mean, the world would be beautiful. I just don't know if practicality wise that works. Streamlining the play, a lot of denied claims are because of premium fraud. I guess I'll just say that. I noticed a lot of
interesting.
if your employer is telling you deny, 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 and just leaning in and being unreasonably aggressive about denying the claim, ask them for the wage
Yeah.
statement. Ask them for the wage statement. I find that I fight for 5 months, and now there's retro
Mm.
TD at a max rate. Oh, it could have been avoided. It could have been a 2 month, 3 months of TD. Now you owe a year of it because this employer dragged you
Oh
down the
yeah.
road without providing you with the wage statement. Get the wage statement. And make sure that that's not the issue, and you're not being taken along for a ride because this employer lied about how much they're paying their employees or what they do for a living. I guess
Sure.
that's one
Sure.
thing I think that on the investigation end, claims adjusters should do. I see a lot of it actually. I'm very surprised about it.
Hmm. No, that's a fascinating response. Now, on the flip side, can you identify injured workers who defendants think may be committing fraud? Can you sense that? Does your alarm radar go off and be like, "Me, mayday, mayday, something's not right here," where the defense may agree or see that on the early side?
We're pretty good at screening a lot of stuff. We might wind up screening out even like people who viably, but yeah, I'm looking for the same thing a defense is looking for at a deposition when I'm doing
Sure.
an intake. I do my own client. I don't represent somebody if I haven't met or at least talk to them over the phone a couple times. And I don't
Sure.
have them. They don't need to sign papers that day. Usually they don't. I make them go home. I make them bring their spouse in, right? So, hiring a lawyer is, I mean, people don't realize how much bad a bad lawyer could do to somebody.
Oh yeah.
And so they rush in because they just don't want to deal with it anymore. And I'm like, you're turning off control over your future, right? So I can screen out when people are asking about money right away. They're trying to ask me what their case is worth. I already know
Mm.
what
Right.
they're looking for. Um, if their injury if it doesn't add up, or if they just have a psych claim and they weren't battered or sexually abused, right, at work,
Mm.
and they say it's because their employer's harassing them, things like that doesn't belong in the workers' comp. File a DHA case, right? Those kinds of things.
Mm. Sure.
What I see where I think that the carriers get themselves into trouble is, let's say a doctor gives somebody work restrictions of no lifting 10 pounds or whatever, right?
Hmm.
And this person's on TD and they're helping their spouse with like a business or something, right? They're helping their spouse with the business or they're going to school or something like that. And they immediately think that's workers' comp fraud. Um, it's not like send it to the doctor and get the doctor to change the restrictions. You don't just stop paying TD, right? The
Oh yeah.
doctors are the
Yeah.
ones saying this person's TD. This is different. Somebody shows up in a walker and you get them walking around a casino for 7 hours. Okay, right?
Right.
But
Right. Right.
that's not
Right.
what this is. This is somebody who is limited. There's an injury, no question. Probably had surgeries, no question. I mean, as a defense attorney, I've had sub rosa, somebody ripping carpet out of his house for 3 days straight. But he had two failed back
Sure.
surgeries. There was no question about that. Right? So that's not
Right.
fraud. And you get yourself down this, this pathway of, you start ringing that bell and you get your SIU involved or whatever. And it's not fraud. The person's not lying to the doctor. The doctor's the one who's saying what their work status is. So go the proper routes. Don't put
Yeah,
the cart
yeah.
before the horse. Just get the doctor to comment on work restrictions. Send them the Sabrosa, right? Say, hey,
Right,
doc,
right,
do you agree with the work restrictions? Then offer a modified work and stop TD, right?
right.
Do the right thing. Sabrosa is rarely damning. And
Right.
if it is, and you have a good attorney, you show it to them. And if they're a good attorney, they're going to be looking at keeping their client out of jail at that point, right?
Right,
How
right.
do we
'Cause
fix?
avoid the
How
DA
do
from prosecuting, right?
yeah, I mean, how do I protect my client at this point? I don't want the DA investigator showing up 6 years from now with a warrant, for my client, right? How do
Sure,
I get
sure,
them out of the
sure.
trouble they're in? Yeah. So and another thing is, like, yeah, I think that's take nothings aren't worth the paper they're printed on. They're not worth the money in a lot of cases.
Sometimes.
If you have an unreasonable, sometimes you got to go there. But
Right.
is usually they're not. The claims manager just doesn't really care about the take nothing as much as they care about audit risk and closure rates. That's what keeps people, and X mods on their clients and stuff. So, anyways, yeah,
Yeah.
I think that people jump to a conclusion of fraud where it's the doctors who are certifying the work status, not the injured worker, right?
Makes a lot of sense, I think. Back to your point, you can't just terminate TD. The good attorney will tell you the same as far as you got to go through the proper channels. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't be on your alert if you think something doesn't smell right. It may not be right, but you have to have that evidence reviewed by the doctor. If you just terminate TD, there's a lot of steps that you're missing. You got to go through the proper channels. So your point is definitely taken. Let's take a break for our Comp Corner email segment where we provide tips and insights for the people who keep comp moving. When your email is read on an episode, our client relations team will send some swag to show our appreciation for your efforts. Claims adjuster Jesus asks, what are the best practice tips when documenting light duty offer and what to do if an employee refuses light duty work? Jesus, before we address what to do when an employee refuses light duty work, we have to keep in mind that the defendant bears the burden of proving both, one, the existence of modified work, and two, that such work has been offered to the applicant within his or her restrictions. I'm honestly surprised at how infrequently carriers and employers make valid modified work offers. When the modified work offer is done correctly and documented properly, it's as close to ironclad as we can get at trial. First, there has to be modified work available. If not, TD is probably owed. If modified work is in existence, then the absolute practice tip is to make the offer in writing. Oral and unclear written offers like texts are often not simply enough. The court will analyze whether there is a valid, bona fide offer of work, which is whether the modified work is specific as to record when the offer was made, where the modified work will take place, and how the modified work will comport with the applicant's work restrictions, usually provided by a treating physician. Practice tip is to be sure to specifically list the job description. Also, be sure to specify the job duties. Finally, describe that the job meets the applicant's work restrictions. When an employer makes a bona fide modified work offer and the applicant refuses, then you do not have to pay temporary disability. Jesus, your email was especially solid as it convinced the Comp Corner team to have a future CE episode focusing entirely on modified work offers, where we will address everyday issues, including reasonable travel distance for modified work offers and how to defend against allegations that modified work aggravated an injury or caused a new injury. Stay tuned. Jesus, thank you for submitting your question to Comp Corner. Patrick, what's the project that you're the most proud of? Can you tell us and share some of what that might be?
So I kind of alluded to the difficulties with medical treatment up here. As a defense attorney, one of the huge motivating factors in me coming to the applicant side was just, as a DA, you just watch these injured warriors, and we're talking people who are dismembered. It just They sit there and they go to the doctor every month. They go, for 24 months. Their TD runs out. They haven't even had an MRI. These clinics aren't geared for these types of injuries. There's no treatment apparatus up here, really. It's just they're urgent care clinics, and there's only two of them.
Hmm.
Um, so the first thing I needed to do is get a PTP up here who deals with workers' comp. And
Sure.
it took me like 13 months, but I was able to. It wasn't, and I didn't do it alone. I mean, there's a couple other AAs who helped me get in touch with folks and vouch for me too, and getting them to come up here and they opened a practice up here, and it's mainly a nurse practitioner, and the doctors are remote,
Hmm.
unfortunately, because there are no doctors up here. But
Right. Right.
there's a lot of folks I mean, they're treating folks that are unrepresented. I've had people that are treating their unrepresented who have come to me, and I'm like, "No, you don't need to be getting between you and the adjuster," right? Just having somebody that can, like I said, AI is automated. And
Right.
the old like, it's not the same thing as requesting treatment under, the Blue Shield, PPO plan, right? It's a different
Right.
system altogether, and we're talking jurisdictional issues, and I can't help people if there's a timely EUR. So getting a doctor that can reference the treatment guidelines in their reports instead of just saying, "Do this because." They attach the PR2 to the RFA, they
Hmm.
list the medical MRI findings in their report. That's a lot of times those are the basis for denying URs, denying treatment. So you get them to a doctor where they have a system because they're
Yeah.
operating within a system. And that was probably the biggest project I've worked on. There's other things I'm working on now. I'm trying to find a way. There's some clients. There's a lot of non-ACOM treatment that people need if they're dismembered and stuff. Um, People need home modifications. Maybe. Transportation's a big thing up here. It's so rural. These are non-ACOM items, but these are a DO or an MD or an MP. They don't know what to request. They don't know how to request a modified toilet or a home health care assessment, things like this. And these are in select cases,
Sure.
but these are cases where it is needed. And
Right.
so I'm trying to coordinate that in a way where it's requested appropriately. It's done with vendors that the defense use that are credible. So
Hmm. Hmm.
I always, I have to do my job, but I have to do it in a way where it doesn't look like I'm just trying to run costs up to juice a CNR.
Right.
These are cases where there isn't going to be a CNR. These are cases where she's 38 and has a catastrophic head injury, and a CNR is the worst thing that can happen to her. Right. So,
Right.
just
Right.
finding that higher level of care for people that they just have no access to anything up here, and getting them that
Right.
access is difficult.
I think that's awesome. I think when you are able to get an NPN or a bunch of PTPs or a nurse practitioner who knows workers' comp in any area, including the Reading area, which you're primarily in, it helps defendants too. Why? Because we have practitioners who understand comp, who understand what a request for authorization is, who know what the acronym UR stands for, who understand IMR. So you're actually helping defendants out quite a bit too by putting those who know the system in place to represent those, to treat those who are injured through the workers' comp system.
Yep.
So that's a benefit right there, a win-win.
Well, and there's that's where the reputation and everything comes into place too, because at some point injured workers, you know, not intentionally, but they become a swipe of an ATM card, right? They become they're a source of revenue for a treater, and sometimes my clients do feel like ATM machines, right? And
Sure.
I need to make it very clear to my clients that I'm going to send you to a comp treater, but I represent you. I don't have a business relationship with them. I represent you, and you do what you feel is best for you. So if I have a treater that recommends a lot of functional restoration and stuff like that, I'm not going to use that to juice a CNR. I'm not going to use that
Mm.
if they need to go, they need to go. I've actually had people go to the functional restoration program where they sounded like a different person afterwards. There's people
Mm.
that it has really changed their lives, but it's not everybody. And a lot of people, they don't want to leave, go be 200 miles away for 8 weeks. And so I'm very clear to them, hey, only go to the treatment that you want to participate in. I represent you. Don't and so that way the carriers aren't they're worried about that. They're worried about the doctors controlling the case. I worry about anybody controlling the case other than me. And I
Sure.
know I already have to
Sure.
share control with a good attorney on the other side, but I don't want to hand over control over my client's future to somebody who's getting money for it, right? Or even
Oh, yeah.
judges, I worry. It's like once you hand control over to somebody else, you're in the passenger seat. I have
Yep.
to wait to what
They're
you
the
pay
ones
for.
driving.
Yeah.
Now, we've already kind of touched base on this, but what are some challenges that you see, the bigger challenges in workers' comp in 2025 heading into 2026 in a short amount of time? What are some challenges that you see in the system today?
Gridlock.
Biggest challenges.
Yeah, the biggest challenge is claims gridlock. It causes issue on reserves. It's gridlocked. It's gridlocked. The courts, the board is gridlocked. I mean, there's some movement I've heard of. I haven't seen it firsthand, but there's movement of a back to the board type mentality for MSCs now because things aren't getting done. There's too many claims that are stuck in the system. If you have an injury from 2021 to 2023, even 24, that there's gridlock, and gridlock leads to other systemic issues. And I think from a systemic point of view, we have a real rough time. I think we're going to be seeing unintended, unprojected outcomes of what we did during COVID for years to come.
I think one thing that you said, which is across the board, I don't care who you represent, who you are in the system, the best file is a closed file. We like to preach the absolute importance of closing files on the defense side for obvious reasons, right? I don't have to explain why a closed file is great, but that rarely, if ever, has anyone here listening in, including Patrick or myself, ever heard anyone complain about their file being closed? I've never heard it. Why? Because the file's closed, they move on with their lives, everyone's out of the system, everyone compromises, releases, moves on. That's across the board, and that's the best way to prevent gridlock is to close out a file. Now, Patrick, conversely, what are some emerging trends in comp that you find interesting today?
First off, the commissioners are just a different group of commissioners. I mean, they are making policy. They are taking up issues. They've taken on misconduct by attorneys on an en banc, review, right? They're shaping law on apportionment. They're shaping law on voc rehabilitation. They're shaping policy on all kinds of issues. I think anticipating reform and stuff. But I mean, I had a case where I reconned a case, and it had nothing to do with what the commissioners sent it back, and they had questions about federal preemption on ERISA credits.
Okay.
They wanted that issue to be tried so that they could take it up because it's been something that has been lingering for 20, 30 years, right? Since the 1980s, right?
Right.
So they're proactive in fixing gaps in the system that are constant drags on litigation. Attorneys' fees disputes between applicants' attorneys. I really think that's they're very. If you look at their holdings, I mean, these aren't kick the can down the road holdings. These are, hey, thoughtful. We're thinking about 100 years from now. I recently had an issue that I had to litigate, and I was going back through 70 plus years of case law, 100 years of case law. I was going back to like the Workers' Compensation Act of 1913 and stuff. So it's just, you look at the holdings there, and you look at where we are now, and then you look at what the commissioners are doing now, and it's like they're mindful of this. They're mindful that what they say today is going to matter in 30 years. So I gotta say that's something that's really fascinating to me. I brought up that helicopter, blade to the head injury. I had a case where this gentleman's rib cage was completely separated from his spine. He wound up at Stanford. It took forever. The poor guy was suffering, but they were able to reattach his spinal cord to his spine, to his rib cage with titanium. The guy looked like Wolverine in an X-ray, and so, the guy's not 100% because of it. He might be through the SIBTF, but not in workers' comp. If that guy was not able to undergo that procedure, it would have been the difference between 100% and 91%, right? And anyway, I mean, just the ability to heal brain injuries. I am fascinated by. I mean, it's expensive, but Center for Neuroskills. I had a gentleman who was electrocuted, a high voltage line landed on his head, and young man. And when they brought him in there, they were able to baseline test him at like a second grade education level, and he left. Wow. He was there for 9 months. He said he felt like he was in jail, but 9 months later, they bring him back up to where they presumed he was at 12th grade education. They were able to get him like, hey, this is what he can and can't do in the labor force. Again, not 100% now, right? So there's that. I mean, I think that's what they can do in the medical technology and what it can do is huge. And the difference between 100% indemnity on a $1,300 a week TD rate for a 39-year-old versus
Right, right.
290, right? I mean, we're talking about, yeah, it might have cost him $900,000 to put him through that program, but they saved, like,
Oh yeah,
6.3,
millions,
6.3
millions.
lifetime benefits.
Yeah,
I mean, the
yeah,
gentleman's not going to die early. He had cognitive issues. And then what type of care would he have needed if he remained at that intellectual level?
right,
I mean, does he
right.
need in-home, supportive services, things like that?
Oh
So
yeah,
again, it just the savings on the front end is a sticker shock, but and I mean, I've seen some nurse case managers that have been, I mean, some of them, I don't think they quite understand what their position is, but I've seen nurse case managers free up barriers of treatment like nobody else. So
yeah.
there's like a lot of encouraging things, but I just, I know that we're attorneys and we're kind of, self-centric and everything, but there are so many good attorneys.
Oh yeah,
Defense attorneys is primarily what I see. There are so many brilliant attorneys.
yeah.
Just amazing, problem solvers, out of the box thinkers, right?
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
They are creative, especially if they have opposing counsel that's creative. And I think that is a testament to how good the attorneys were that we all mentored under.
Oh yeah.
So that's I just I there's I mean, I've been able to be candid with attorneys, and I've called one gentleman, he's gonna lose his leg, you know? And I said, "I don't care what this guy's PD rating is. I don't want him to lose his leg." And they're
Yeah.
like, "Neither do we." And we had a common interest and a common goal. We got him to a vascular surgeon. We got him on the Eliquis or whatever. And I mean, the guy was
Yeah,
gonna keep his leg, you know? And
yeah,
his
yeah.
his PD winds up being much, much lower. I forget what the rating is now, but it's somewhere in the 50s instead of 100, right?
Sure.
So
But the quality of life and that can't
he's still
be
working. He's
calculated.
still
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
she the quality of life of not having a leg is terrible, yeah, compared to keeping it. I mean, it's a long recovery for the gentleman, but I
Sure.
mean, I had an AME say, like, telling, like, saying, "What are you guys doing? Fix this guy's leg," right? And it was a vascular issue, and it just it takes an intelligent attorney to sit there and listen and hear that, and then explain it, and
Right.
vet it so that they know they're not getting taken for a ride. So yeah, I think that the problem solving abilities of attorneys right now, I think we understand that it's not just to sit in the courtroom and look important. It's nothing like you see on TV. And
Right,
I
right.
see that across the board, and a lot of these attorneys understand the advanced objectives of insurance carriers. They understand the concerns about, the switch over to excess, and having clean claims processes to get to that point, and fixing problems so that there's no misunderstandings when you get there. It's just
Right.
there's a lot of good attorneys. Yeah, I guess that's, yeah, and they're not,
Oh,
and they're younger.
yeah.
It's not like only the 72-year-old attorneys are smart. There's a lot of smart, brilliant attorneys that are younger than me, right? So yeah, that's something that I just every day it's fascinating. Every day there's always a new problem, and there's always different solutions that people will work with you. Yeah.
No, that's a very thoughtful response. Now, one thing I want to run by you, I think you've already answered this indirectly through two different examples you've already given, but how about the inherent conflict between getting an injured worker max benefits, i.e., 100%, or going the voc route, doing all that discovery, but in the end, possibly leaving the injured worker restricted out of a job? Maybe they've had long term. Now, you've already answered this in two different hypotheticals already, but what about that inherent conflict that you have to see and deal with? I'm assuming multiple times at any time right now in your own current caseload.
Well, I think that speaks to the conflict of interest that an attorney would have with their client.
Yeah.
My
Hmm,
objective is
interesting.
not to get somebody 100% disability when they walk in my door, because that may not be the best thing for them. The best thing for some of my clients is to have a 0% award, because they're making $3,000 a week in a heavy trade union. The worst thing that could happen to them is being on temporary disability. They just lost half their pay, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And getting them PD pushes them out of the industry. Um, that's that inherent contract, the duty of what is it, unobstructed loyalty, right? Like uninhibited loyalty or whatever, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
You are a fiduciary for your client's interest, not for your own. The worst thing in the world for somebody is to be 100%,
Mm,
because you're 100%. You can't change the facts of the case, right?
right.
If somebody's 100%, they're 100%. The subsequent injury benefit trust fund is very, very useful, um, for people that are 100%, because a lot of times they're 100% because they do have underlying pre-existing conditions, right?
Sure.
And
Sure.
you apportion those out, right? We have apportionment and we have SIBTF. You can't have one without the other. So I think that if you have, if you have people complaining about paying into SIBTF, well, then you better not be complaining. Then goodbye to apportionment. You can't
Sure.
have
Sure.
they have to coexist, right? You have
Yeah.
to have apportionment and the SIF. So yeah, I mean, I don't see a case as far as PD. Once I start making that decision, I stop being a lawyer,
Mm,
right?
interesting.
Your client's case needs to fit their objectives. Usually it's getting a maximum recovery, but it's based on
Hmm,
the facts of their case. Um, and unfortunately, it does take several QMEs to get there in complex injuries, several different
sure.
specialties.
Sure.
But this isn't just running QME specialties because I'm trying to run a bill up. You know what I mean? It is like, hey, the person has bruxing, they have bruxing. I need to have that looked at and rated so that could be in their future medical, right? Things like that. And I try to be deliberate with it. And it gets misunderstood sometimes. But yeah, I don't think there's an inherent conflict unless
Yeah.
that conflict exists between me and my client. If I'm looking at maximizing their PD award based on my recovery, then I'm not looking out for them.
Now, I think you gave a super enlightened response. I think it's a relief to those on our end. Frankly, I wish a lot of more AAs, gave that kind of outlook that you gave. But it is about the big picture, right? It's never about just giving anyone 100% and taking away their quality of life if they're in their 40s now for the next 40, 50 years of life expectancy. So I'm really relieved that you gave that response. But I think the cool thing that you said was, hey, it's all about big picture. You have to see the big picture perspective. And that goes for both sides, our side especially. But the pictures we look at are different, right? You're looking
Yeah.
at big picture of that particular client of yours, that particular injured worker's quality of life, where they are, where they've been, where they are now, and where they will be. We, however, look at things a little differently. We look at our clients or insurance companies, carriers, TPAs. Their outlook is different, but the main thing here is you have to look at your client's big picture goals currently and in the future. And then once you kind of do that, then hopefully our goals and your goals will coincide so you can close out a
Yeah,
file and
most of the
close and
time.
reach that resolution, right?
Usually they do. And if they don't, and I'm not picking on employers here, but if they don't, it's usually because either my client's lying to me or the employer is lying to the insurance company. That's usually when
Sure.
we don't have 99% of our goals are getting to what do we need here? Let's figure out the answer to this. Let's figure out the answer to this. Let's use credible doctors to figure out the answer to this. Let's get to where we're getting, and then we get there. And if there's a barrier, it's because of the employer or the injured worker. One of them is not being
Yeah.
forthcoming, right? Sometimes both of them.
Absolutely.
But no, there's that, and again, I see it so clearly here. If you don't have purpose in life, especially man, but if you don't have purpose in life, as far as doing something to not be a burden on your family, it becomes really, really, really dark. So
Yeah.
being
Yeah.
100% disabled and never working again, I that is a bad, bad outcome.
Mm,
The worst outcome.
mm,
Uh, and they better volunteer or something because people die early because of if they don't have purpose and something to push them forward and something they feel
yeah.
good about. They don't have a lot of purpose to live.
Yeah. Yep.
And people die from disease, suicide, things like that. They drink, they use drugs, they fall apart. Their marriages end, they lose everything. Yeah. So
Yeah.
steering somebody towards the high maximum PD award is well, and also here's another thing. Indemnity hasn't changed since 2014.
Yeah.
Isn't it
Still
better
same
to
PD chart.
right?
Same
Isn't
PD
it better
chart.
just for Benson sometimes to get if they're going to be back in the labor force, maybe we get a lower award now because I mean PD's got to be higher at some point, right? It's got to be higher than 290 a
Hopefully
week in the
not, but
future.
yeah. Right.
Well, no,
Right.
no. I
Right.
mean, it's going to be not higher than 290 a week, right? It's got to go up at some point. I mean,
Yeah.
it's been,
Yeah.
it hasn't adjusted with anything. I mean, I'm saying put a COLA on PD. I mean, as an AA, I'd love to put a COLA on PD, but it's not going to happen, right? It's like at some point
Right.
though, it has to adjust up to something because it's. I mean, we've had massive inflation over the last 12 years and no
Hey, when you're
adjustment to
paying
permanent disability.
$8 for a gallon of milk, I mean, something's not right. So your point is
Sure,
100% taken.
right. So
PD's only gonna go up sooner or later, correct?
if somebody's 37 years old, maybe a 46% versus a 20% PD award, maybe the 20% is in their better favor, right? But the work
Point
restrictions
taken.
are really what I'm talking to clients about because that's what changes their life. The permanent work restrictions, whether or not they can go back to work at that employer, what they're going to do next. I mean, the majority of what I do is helping clients figure out what they're going to do
Mm,
after if they don't get better.
yeah.
From day one, I'm talking to them about that because no CNR is ever going to make anybody whole
Mm,
on its own. It's not designed for
right.
that.
Yeah.
And I don't want it to go to paying off credit cards either. It's like investment in their future, right? So it's more
Sure.
about, hey, what's your plan if you don't get better?
Now, what you said was great. It's all about getting to the finish line. That's a mutual goal of your clients. That's definitely a mutual goal of our clients. And speaking of finish lines, we're almost there with you, Mr. Gorman. One thing we like to ask all of our guests, including yourself, where do you think workers' compensation will be in the year 2050? Fast forward about 25 years from now, Patrick. Where will we be?
I try not to be pessimistic, but I think that it is going to be completely digital, and injured workers are just they're gonna
Mm,
if you want treatment, you're gonna have to find whoever has the best software to combat defendant software, honestly.
interesting.
I really think that that's where we're gonna be. I think it is just I think that we're gonna delegate so much to systems,
Mm.
um, or through agencies. Through agency, it's all gonna be agency and computer programs. Um, and people are going to make decisions based on who has what computer program, not who's going to provide them with the better care, things like that.
Fascinating. Thank you, Patrick, for sharing your thoughts with us. Let's dig a little deeper and get to know Patrick better with a little 5 and 5. You know the rules. 5-ish questions in 5-ish minutes. Now, Patrick, honesty is a virtue that we keep in the highest regard here on Comp Corner. But what's your go-to excuse for being late, either real or made up?
I was talking to a judge. I was talking
Oh,
to a
that's
judge.
actually
That's
good.
that. That's always the go-to.
That's actually pretty dang good. I might have to take that, except, if you're talking to a judge, right? But, I think one excuse that actually made sense. I remember when my wife was pregnant, someone at the Kaiser class kind of said, "Hey, just by the way, one of the one of the benefits of having children are that you can always use them as an excuse." Now, I don't use my kids bringing as excuse, like I don't want to say, God forbid, they're sick. But hey, if you got to say that, hey, I had to pick up my kid. Rarely does anyone say, "Oh God, great, go pick up your kid." They understand that. So every now and then, if you got to bust that out of your back pocket, I'm gonna steal your judge excuse, but I think the kid excuse is not a bad one either.
My youngest is now 18. So if I say I had to pick up my kid and they're like, "How old are they?" And I'm like, 24 and 18." I think I'm gonna get called out on that one. Yeah.
Well, eye rolls might come about. No, thanks, Patrick. So, Patrick, well done, great start. Patrick, what's a movie or a TV show that you can quote word for word?
Oh gosh. Pulp Fiction.
Yeah, yeah.
Probably my go-to.
Oh
First
yeah.
first time my wife and I were hanging out, we watched Pulp Fiction, and my favorite part of that movie is in the diner where he says, "What wallet's yours?" And he said, "It's the one that says BMFer on it," right? And then he pulls out the wallet and it says it on. And so I
Oh
remember
yeah.
telling Jill, "Hey, this is my favorite part of the movie." And a week later, in the mail, I got something, and it was a
Ah,
wallet that said BMFer on it. And I'm like, "I think I'm gonna marry this girl." Yeah, it told me everything I needed to know.
Pulp Fiction's a classic. That was the greatest, one of the best years of cinema. I think it was
Yeah.
1995. Pulp Fiction, Shawshank. I want to say Forrest Gump got movie of the year, but
I
that's a
could I
great
could quote
answer.
Forrest. Yeah, I could quote Forrest all day too, yeah.
Oh, yep. I think my answer would be Rocky 4 or Coming to America. I think those two movies,
You
modern
know,
day
a
classics, I
a
guess.
hidden gem is Trading Places with Eddie Murphy and Dan Aykroyd.
Oh yeah.
I
Oh
wind
yeah.
up quoting that one quite a bit too.
Randolph. Yeah, that's a great one. Now, Patrick, if your phone had 3 apps left, which ones would you keep?
At least one of the puzzles, like, where you try to move the hexes or solve the puzzle, 'cause you don't wanna I'm really hyperactive, and, if my brain's not doing something, I get anxious, right? So I do that. Um, Unfortunately, my emails, because
Right.
if I'm not looking at my emails, something's going wrong, right?
Oh yeah. Oh
Um,
yeah.
and, I've gotta be able to look things up, right? So some type of search engine, whatever it
Hmm.
may be. So that would be those would be the 3 that would have to be on there. I could lose the text. I text or modern day harassment, but yeah.
That's a very responsible and forward-thinking response, Patrick. You're far more advanced than I am. Mine would be YouTube because I'm a YouTube junkie. YouTube Premium, by the way, not a sponsor, but man, best $12 a month I think I've ever spent. YouTube Premium, no commercials. Big fan of that. Also, my calendar. Sheesh, if I didn't have my Google Calendar on my phone, I'd probably just wander aimlessly in circles.
Yeah.
Also, my pedometer. I do take pride in my steps. Pedometer would be one of those. I know it's a very old man answer of me, but hey, why not a good little phone app like that?
I didn't even think about the calendar. I think that one is, yeah. I have a hard time being where I'm supposed to be, having a calendar on my phone. I can't have that. The girls would kill me if they had to call me every time I had an appointment.
Sure. Now, Patrick, what's a piece of advice that sounded dumb at first, but turned out to be true?
Time, just take your time. Wait, be patient. Everything just works itself out. That's the
Yeah.
last thing I wanted to hear as a young man, because I just wanted things to be fixed now, or things to happen now. But no, the long road is always more prosperous and safe and safer. Yeah. I hate it when people, when you're going through something and people say, "Oh, time heals all." It's the last thing you want to hear, but it's the truest thing.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a very sage-like response, Patrick. Thank you for that wisdom. I think, yeah, you're right. Hey, when you're younger, you wanted everything yesterday, right? You want everything now, or I can't wait, can't breathe. But as you get older, there's a few things you realize, hey, maybe sometimes the best seeds are those that are planted. You don't need responses, right away. Sometimes it's okay to wait the long
Yeah.
course. That's a winning solution. Thank you.
Yeah.
My answer would be to-do lists. I remember my old chancellor back when I was in college, at UC Irvine, he made a speech to my fraternity, and he was like, "Hey, everyone, to-do lists are something that he recommends." And I was like, what a joke. Why would the chancellor of a major UC be telling us about to-do lists on Post-its? But he was right. Dean Cicerone was his name. To this day, my kids make fun of me because I'm a huge to-do list guy. I jot them down. There's something about getting things out of your head and putting them on paper that really just can't be calculated. I think it's really big.
Yeah, you get the gratification too. If you get to check it off every day, you get to check. You get that gratification every day. You've accomplished something. You've had some form of success in that day. So even a bad day, you got something done. Yeah, no, those are great.
Nothing like that scratching off that done item, right? No, absolutely. Now, Patrick, if your life had a theme song, okay, think of almost like if you're going to the batter's box in baseball. If your life had a theme song, what would it be?
That is hard. 'Cause it's like,
I'll
what's your
start. You
favorite
want me to
song?
start?
Your favorite song is usually nothing about you, right? The favorite song you have,
True.
that has nothing to do with you. And I've been listening to a lot of Sinatra and Dean Martin lately, and I am not that sweet. So I don't know. Oh
My way? How
God.
about
I
my
mean,
way, huh?
now that you brought up, Rocky, obviously, like the Rocky theme song, that's in my mind. Oh
Nice.
gosh, I don't know if I can answer that. God, jeez. I'll do the Rocky theme song just because it comes to mind. But yeah, I
Eye of the
mean,
Tiger.
yeah, Eye of the Tiger. That thing gets that goes through my head. I mean, that's every day there's challenges, right? And
Yeah.
yeah,
Oh,
I'm a
yeah.
huge Rocky fan too. My son Anthony, my son is I bestowed it on him. He loves Rocky, same thing, and he's in law school now. And before he, takes
Oh,
a
wow.
final exam or whatever, I'm sure that's what's going through his mind is that Rocky theme song. So, Eye of the
Oh,
Tiger,
Anthony, right on. I remember Anthony was a little young pup,
little
and now he's already in law
little
school. That's
guy.
great.
Yeah.
Yeah. My answer would be Hate It or Love It, The Underdog's on Top by The Game. Something about the underdog fighting his way through that, I guess, says a lot about maybe my personality and who I like to strive myself to be like. So I think you've done a great job, Mr. Gorman, in 5 and 5. You've been a pleasure to have on the podcast. We can't thank you enough for joining us today.
Thank you very much for having me. This has been great.
Huge thank you to Patrick Gorman for coming on Comp Corner. Kudos to Mr. Amir Riabi and Ms. Tammy Welty for the phenomenal production as usual. Check the show notes for sending your Comp Corner questions. See you all next time on Comp Corner.